Gunshots echoed through the crisp morning air of Redemption Creek, like harbingers of the end of an era of peace. Sarah Calloway was watering her horse in the stable when the sound reached her, causing her to pause for a moment before continuing her work. 8 years after James's death, she still flinched at the sound of gunfire. It wasn't fear, it was a reflex formed during her days as a battlefield nurse. Gunfire meant more lives to save more blood to soak her palms, but not today. Today was special. Sarah smoothed her simple gray dress and put on a wide-brimmed hat to hide her auburn hair, now streaked with premature silver. She was heading into town to meet her brother Henry for lunch. These monthly meetings were sacred to her, the only time she allowed herself to leave the solitude of her small ranch. The ride into Redemption Creek took 30 minutes. As Sarah approached the outskirts, she noticed something unusual. People were running through the streets, some screaming, others just trying to get away from the town center. Her heart rate quickened as she urged her horse forward. The gunshots had come from this direction. "Bank robbery," shouted a man as he ran past her. "They're shooting up the place." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The bank where Henry worked. She kicked her horse into a gallop, weaving through the panicked crowds toward the limestone building at the center of town. More gunshots rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. As she rounded the corner onto Main Street, she saw them, 5 men in long dusters and bandanas, covering their faces, backing out of the bank's entrance, rifles drawn. One of them was dragging something, someone. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the bloodied figure, Henry, her little brother. "We got what we came for." One of the men called out, a tall figure with a distinctive scar, visible even beneath his bandana. "Let's make an example out of this one." "No!" Sarah screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. She dismounted and pushed toward them, but the crowd was too thick, everyone pushing in the opposite direction. The tall man with the scar knelt beside Henry, who was conscious but bleeding heavily from the shoulder. Sarah could see her brother's lips moving. He was pleading. The man leaned in as if listening carefully, then threw his head back in laughter. He stood and aimed his rifle at Henry's head. "This is what happens to folks who stick their noses where they don't belong," he announced to the terrified onlookers who had stopped to watch from a distance. Sarah broke through the crowd still 20 yards away. As the shot rang out, Henry's body jerked once, then lay still in the dirt. The outlaws mounted their horses and rode off, their saddlebags bulging with the bank's money. As they passed, one of the bandanas slipped, revealing a face that made Sarah's heart stop. Jake Harmon, one of James's men during the war. A face she knew well from the photographs her husband had kept. A face that now rode away from her dead brother's body. Sarah ran to Henry, cradling his head in her lap, her gray dress quickly soaking up his blood. His eyes were open but unseeing, a neat bullet hole centered in his forehead. For the first time since the war, since James's death, Sarah Calloway wept openly, rocking back and forth with her brother's body, oblivious to the growing crowd around her. Sheriff Frank Miller arrived 10 minutes too late, his deputy in tow, both looking suspiciously unruffled, for men supposedly responding to a bank robbery. "Ma'am," Miller said, removing his hat in a show of respect that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm mighty sorry about your brother. These outlaws are getting bolder. Likely the Carson gang from up north." Sarah looked up at him, her tears stopped, now replaced by a coldness that had settled deep in her chest. "That wasn't the Carson gang," she said flatly. "One of them was Jake Harmon. He served with my husband." Miller's face twitched slightly. "You're mistaken, Mrs. Calloway. Grief can play tricks on the eyes. The Carson gang has been hitting banks all through the territory." "I know what I saw," Sarah insisted. "Well, I'll note it in my report," Miller said dismissively. "We'll do everything we can to bring these men to justice, but they're likely crossing the territorial line as we speak. Not much we can do after that." He turned to address the gathering crowd. "Show's over, folks. Banks closed for the day. Anyone who had business there can come back tomorrow." Sarah remained on the ground with Henry's body until the undertaker came. She walked beside the cart as they took him to the funeral home, her dress stiff with dried blood, her face set in a mask of grief that hid the rage building inside her. That night, alone in her ranch house, Sarah opened a chest she hadn't touched in 8 years. Inside lay James's uniform, his letters, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, his Springfield rifle. As she unwrapped it, her fingers traced the inscription on the stock. Justice, not vengeance. James's motto, the words he lived by, the words he died believing in. I'm sorry, James, she whispered, lifting the rifle. But justice isn't working anymore. 3 days after Henry's funeral, Sarah returned to town dressed in her dead brother's trousers and shirt, her hair pinned up under a hat. She slipped into the sheriff's office while Miller was out on his rounds, using the key Henry had shown her years ago. In case of emergency, he'd said with a laugh. Some emergency. She went straight to Miller's desk, rifling through the papers, until she found the report on the bank robbery. As she'd suspected, there was no mention of Jake Harmon. According to the official record, it was the Carson gang, and they'd escaped across the territorial line, case closed. But there was something else, a torn piece of paper with rough handwriting. H. Calloway knows too much. Make it look like robbery gone wrong. Leave no witnesses. W.B. William Burke. The judge, the most powerful man in the county. Sarah pocketed the note and continued searching. In a locked drawer which she opened with a letter opener, she found a ledger with names, dates, and amounts. Her brother's name was there, with yesterday's date and a notation. Problem solved, payment to J.H. and crew, $500. J.H. Jake Harmon. This wasn't a random robbery, this was an execution. Her brother had been targeted specifically. But why? The door to the office opened, and Sarah barely had time to slip behind a filing cabinet before Deputy Walton stepped in. He moved to the desk, clearly looking for something, and cursed when he found the drawer open. "Damn it, Frank," he muttered. "I told you to burn that ledger." He grabbed the book and headed toward the small stove in the corner of the office. Sarah knew she had seconds to act. She emerged from her hiding place, James's rifle raised. "Put it down, Deputy," she said quietly. Walton turned his hand instinctively, moving to his holster. "Mrs. Calloway, what the hell are you doing here? Learning the truth. Drop your gun. Kick it over here." Walton assessed her, taking in the rifle aimed at his chest, the steady hands holding it. "You don't want to do this, ma'am. You're grieving, not thinking straight." "I'm thinking clearer than I have in years," Sarah replied, the gun now. Reluctantly, Walton drew his revolver with 2 fingers and placed it on the floor, kicking it toward her. "What do you want? Why was my brother killed?" "What did he know?" Walton's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah aimed the rifle at his knee. "Next lie cost you a leg. Try again." Seeing the look in her eyes, Walton swallowed hard. "Your brother was poking around in things that weren't his business. Bank records, money going places. It shouldn't. Judge Burke's money." The deputy's eyes widened slightly. "You're smarter than they gave you credit for, ma'am. Where's Jake Harmon? Why should I tell you anything? You're going to kill me anyway." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not like you. I don't kill unarmed men. Not yet anyway. But I will shoot out both your kneecaps if you don't start talking." Walton believed her. "Harmon and his crew are holed up at the old Carson mining camp, about 20 miles north. They'll be there until the heat dies down. But you're crazy if you think you can take on 5 armed men by yourself." "Who said I'd be taking them all on at once?" Sarah replied. She moved to the stove and picked up the ledger. "Is this the only copy?" "Far as I know." "Who else is involved, besides the judge and Miller?" Walton hesitated, and Sarah raised the rifle again. "Mayor Thompson," he blurted, "and Carson himself. They call themselves the Covenant. They run everything in this county, have since after the war." Sarah nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Deputy." She struck him with the butt of the rifle, hard enough to knock him unconscious but not to kill him. Then she tied him up, gagged him, and locked him in the cell at the back of the office. Before leaving, she penned a note and pinned it to Walton's shirt. "I know everything, S.C. Let them wonder. Let them fear." The Carson mining camp was exactly where Walton had said it would be, a collection of dilapidated buildings. Nestled in a narrow valley, Sarah had spent the day observing it, from the ridge above, counting men, noting routines. 5 men, just as Walton had said. Jake Harmon was among them. She'd recognize that swagger anywhere. James had once commented on it. "Harmon walks like he's God's gift to the cavalry." Now, as dust settled over the camp, Sarah watched one of the men separate from the others, heading to the outhouse at the edge of the camp. Perfect. She moved silently down the slope, approaching the outhouse from behind. As the man exited, adjusting his suspenders, Sarah stepped out, pressing James's rifle against his spine. "Not a sound," she whispered. "Walk into the trees, slow." The man complied, his body tense. Once they were out of earshot of the camp, Sarah ordered him to turn around. He was younger than she'd expected. Maybe 25. He had a patchy beard and frightened eyes. "You were at the bank," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. Sarah struck him across the face with the back of her hand. "Don't lie to me. I was there. I saw you. You helped kill my brother." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're the woman who was screaming, the dead man's sister." His name was Henry Calloway. "Say it. Henry Calloway." The young outlaw repeated, his voice shaking. "Why was he targeted?" "I don't know the details. Harmon just said it was a special job. More money than usual. We were supposed to make it look like a robbery, but that one teller had to be dealt with special. Made an example of who hired Harmon." "I don't know. I swear Harmon handles all that. We just follow orders." Sarah studied his face. He was telling the truth. He was too low in the hierarchy to know the bigger picture. "Please," he begged. "I got a wife, a baby on the way. I just needed the money." "So did the people in that bank," Sarah replied coldly. "Some of them had families too." "I didn't kill anyone," he protested. "I was just the lookout." "But you stood by and watched. You took your cut of the blood money." The young outlaw began to weep. "Please, I'll leave the territory. You'll never see me again. I'm sorry about your brother, I really am." Sarah felt something inside her harden. "So am I." The sound of the rifle shot echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering into the darkening sky. The remaining 4 outlaws were on high alert when their companion didn't return. They armed themselves, forming a defensive perimeter around the largest cabin. Sarah watched from the shadows, changing positions frequently. She had expected this one down, her presence known. Now the real hunt would begin. She waited until deep in the night when 2 of the men ventured out to search for their missing comrade. She followed one, a heavy-set man with a limp, as he checked the perimeter of the camp. When he stopped to light a cigarette, cupping his hands around the match, Sarah closed in. "You helped kill my brother," she said, stepping out of the shadows. "Henry Calloway." Unlike the younger man, this outlaw reacted instantly, drawing his pistol as he turned. Sarah fired first, hitting him in the chest. He got off one wild shot before falling, the sound of gunfire alerting the camp. Sarah melted back into the darkness as the remaining outlaws burst from the cabin, guns drawn. She circled around behind them, slipping into the now empty cabin. Inside, she found what she was looking for: saddlebags filled with cash from the bank robbery, and more importantly, papers. Correspondence between Harmon and someone identified only as WB. She quickly scanned the letters. They detailed a complex money laundering operation involving the bank, with references to problematic witnesses who needed to be handled. Henry's name appeared in the most recent letter. Footsteps approached the cabin. Sarah slipped behind the door just as one of the outlaws entered. "Mitch, you in here?" he called out nervously. Sarah brought the butt of her rifle down on his head as he passed, knocking him unconscious. This one she tied up. She needed information, and 3 dead men told no tales. When he came to, he found himself bound to a chair, Sarah sitting across from him, cleaning her rifle by the light of a kerosene lamp. "Where's Harmon?" she asked without looking up. The outlaw spat at her. "Go to hell, lady." Sarah set aside the rifle and picked up a hunting knife. "I was a nurse during the war. I know exactly where to cut to cause the most pain without killing you. We can do this the easy way, or we can take all night." Something in her voice, the clinical detachment, perhaps convinced him she wasn't bluffing. "Harmon took off," he said, "right after you shot Dawson. Said he had to report to the judge." "Judge Burke?" "Yeah, the big man himself. Harmon works directly for him. And the bank robbery, the money laundering. Been going on for years. Burke and his Covenant boys used the bank to clean their dirty money. Your brother stumbled onto it, started asking questions, became a problem." Sarah nodded. It made sense now. Henry had always been too curious for his own good, too honest to look the other way. "What's your name?" she asked the outlaw. Wilson Tim. Wilson. Well, Mr. Wilson, you're going to tell me everything you know about the Covenant, and then you're going to deliver a message for me. Team. By dawn, Sarah had what she needed: names, operations, locations. The Covenant was larger than she'd imagined, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of county governance. Judge Burke was indeed the head, with Sheriff Miller, Mayor Thompson, and Cattle Baron George Carson making up the core leadership. She released Wilson with a message for Harmon and Burke. I know everything. One by one, you'll all pay for Henry's death. Instead of heading directly back to town, Sarah took a detour to her ranch. She needed supplies and time to think. The problem was bigger than she'd anticipated. This wasn't just about 5 outlaws. It was about a corrupt system that had taken root in Redemption Creek, with Judge Burke at its center. As she approached her property, she noticed something amiss: smoke rising from her chimney. Someone was inside. Sarah approached cautiously, rifle ready. Through the window, she could see a man sitting at her table drinking her coffee. He was well-dressed, with a notebook open before him. Not one of the outlaws or sheriff's men. She entered silently through the back door, her rifle aimed at the stranger's head. You have 10 seconds to explain why you're in my house before I pull this trigger, she said. The man didn't even flinch. He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. Mrs. Calloway, he said calmly, my name is Matthew Cooper. I'm a journalist with the Territorial Tribune. I've been investigating the Covenant for the past 6 months. I believe we can help each other. Sarah kept the rifle trained on him. You broke into my house. I apologize for that. But after what happened at the Carson camp last night, I figured direct action was necessary. You've accomplished more against them in one night than the law has in years. How do you know about that? Cooper smiled thinly. I have sources, just as I know about your brother's murder, the bank records he discovered, and Judge Burke's involvement. Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. What do you want from me? An alliance. You want revenge. I want the truth. Together we might actually succeed where others have failed. Others? Who else has tried to take them down? Cooper's face darkened. A federal marshal named Jackson was on his way to Redemption Creek 2 weeks ago, responding to evidence your brother sent him. He never arrived. His body was found in a ravine. Tragic accident, according to Sheriff Miller's report. Sarah set her rifle down and sank into a chair. Henry sent evidence to a marshal. He never told me. He was trying to protect you, Cooper said gently. But now you're deep in it anyway. He pushed his notebook toward her. I've been gathering evidence against the Covenant for months. Names, dates, operations. Your brother was my source inside the bank. Sarah looked up sharply. You knew Henry? Cooper nodded. He was a brave man. Contacted me after he discovered discrepancies in the bank's ledgers. We met several times. He was determined to expose Burke and his cronies. And you let him put himself at risk. You got him killed. I warned him to be careful. Cooper said, his voice tight with emotion. I told him to wait until the marshal arrived before confronting anyone. But Henry was principled. When he found out how deep the corruption went, he couldn't stay quiet. He confronted Judge Burke directly the day before the robbery. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining her idealistic little brother standing up to the most powerful man in the county. It would have been just like him. Why should I trust you? She asked finally. Because I'm the only one in this town who wants them brought down as much as you do. Cooper pulled back his collar, revealing a jagged scar across his throat. 2 months ago, Miller's deputies caught me snooping around the land office. This was their warning. Next time they won't stop at a warning. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. What exactly do you propose? Cooper spread out his notes on the table. The Covenant has a complex operation. It's not just money laundering. They're involved in land theft, extortion, even human trafficking. But they're careful. Each member only knows pieces of the whole. Burke is the only one with the complete picture. So we go after Burke. Sarah said simply. Cooper laughed, though there was no humor in it. Directly, that's suicide. He's too well protected. We need to dismantle his organization, piece by piece, cut off his arms before going for the head. I've already started, Sarah pointed out. 3 of Harmon's men are dead. 1 is delivering a message. And now they know someone's coming for them. We need to be smarter than that. Cooper tapped his notebook. Burke is hosting a gala at his estate next week. All the county's elite will be there, including every member of the Covenant. It's our chance to gather evidence. Evidence, Sarah scoffed. I'm not interested in evidence. I want justice for Henry. And how many will you kill to get it? 510, the entire town. Where does it end? Mrs. Calloway. Sarah had no answer for that. Cooper softened his tone. Your brother wanted justice too, but he wanted it done right. He believed in the law, even when those entrusted with it failed. Help me finish what he started. The right way. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land she and James had once dreamed of turning into a thriving ranch. Now it was just her, a widow with a rifle and a thirst for vengeance. I need to think, she said finally. Of course, Cooper replied. I'm staying at the Redemption Creek Hotel Room, 212. When you're ready to talk, find me. After he left, Sarah opened the chest containing James's belongings again. Among his letters, she found one she hadn't opened before his last, delivered after his death. She'd been too grief-stricken to read it then, and somehow had never found the courage since. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed paper. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I've fallen in battle. I pray you never need to see these words, but a soldier must be practical about such things. I've seen men consumed by hatred in this war on both sides. Good men transformed into monsters by their thirst for vengeance. Promise me you won't let that happen to you. Whatever comes, remember that justice and vengeance are not the same. Justice heals. Vengeance only creates more wounds. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known, my love. Strong enough to choose the harder path. Until we meet again. James. Sarah folded the letter carefully and returned it to the chest. Then she removed Henry's saddlebags from her horse and emptied the contents onto the table. Among the bank papers and ledgers, she found a small journal, Henry's private notes on the Covenant's operations. The last entry, dated the day before his death, read, Met with Judge Burke today. Told him I knew everything and had sent copies to Marshal Jackson. He just smiled, said I was playing a game I couldn't win. But this isn't a game. People are suffering while these men profit. Someone has to stand up to them. If not me, then who? Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes for the first time since the day of the robbery. Her impulsive, idealistic little brother. So much like James, it hurt. She closed the journal and made her decision. Cooper was having dinner in the hotel restaurant when Sarah found him that evening. She sat across from him without invitation, her face composed in a mask of determination. Tell me about this gala, she said. Cooper hid his relief well. Annual charity affair, the pillars of the community congratulating themselves on their generosity while plotting their next land grab. And how do we get in? I have an invitation, Cooper said. Press coverage. You would be my assistant. Sarah nodded, formulating a plan already. I'll need address and access to the house beforehand, if possible. What exactly do you have in mind, Mrs. Calloway? You want evidence? I want Burke and Harmon. I believe we can accomplish both. She leaned forward. But understand this, Mr. Cooper. If they try to hurt you or me, or anyone else, I won't hesitate to use this. She opened her handbag just enough for him to glimpse James's service revolver inside. Cooper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. Just remember, we're trying to bring them to justice, not become judge and executioner ourselves. Justice requires truth, Sarah replied, echoing words she'd heard James say 1,000 times. Let's start there. Hovering as she left the restaurant, Sarah didn't notice the man watching from the corner, nor did she see him follow Cooper when he retired to his room later that night. If she had, she might have recognized Jake Harmon, his face hard as granite, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The hunt had indeed begun, but Sarah wasn't the only hunter in Redemption Creek. The next morning, Sarah woke to pounding on her door. She reached for James's revolver, but it was only Cooper, his face ashen. They came for me last night, he said, pushing past her into the house. Harmon and 2 others. I barely got out through the window. Sarah searched his face. Are you hurt? No, but they destroyed my room, all my notes, my evidence gone. Not all of it, Sarah replied. She went to the loose floorboard where she'd hidden Henry's journal and the bank documents. We still have these, and there's something else. She retrieved the ledger she'd taken from the sheriff's office. Names, dates, amounts, direct connections between Burke Miller and at least a dozen enforcers, including Harmon. Cooper's eyes widened as he paged through the ledger. This is it. This is what we need with this. And Henry's documents, we have enough to bring to the territorial governor. Even Burke can't fight this. Wait, the territorial governor is 3 days right away, Sarah pointed out. And now they know we're working together. We need somewhere safe to plan our next move. Cooper thought for a moment. There's a place, an old line shack about 10 miles east of here. Belongs to a rancher named Martinez. He's no friend of the Covenant. They've been trying to force him off his land for years. Can he be trusted? With our lives, he lost his son to one of Miller's deputies last year, resisting arrest. Supposedly, Sarah nodded grimly. Pack what you need. We leave in an hour. As they prepared to depart, Sarah took one last look around the small ranch house. She might never see it again. She realized the thought brought less pain than she'd expected. Without James, without Henry, it was just a house, not a home. She mounted her horse, James's rifle secured in a saddle scabbard, his revolver tucked into her belt beneath her coat. Cooper rode beside her, his saddlebags heavy with the evidence they'd salvaged. You understand what this means, he said as they headed east. Once we take this to the governor, there's no turning back. These men will use every resource they have to stop us, and if we succeed, they'll hang. Good, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Justice demands no less. But even as she said it, she wondered, was this justice she was seeking or vengeance? And when the time came, would she be able to tell the difference? The answer waited somewhere ahead in the bloody days to come. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it offered something Sarah hadn't felt in days. Security nestled in a small valley with clear sight lines in all directions. They would see anyone approaching long before they arrived. Martinez, a weathered Mexican rancher with sad eyes and a firm handshake, had welcomed them without questions. Any enemy of the Covenant is a friend of mine, he'd said, simply showing them to the shack before returning to his main ranch house a mile away. For 3 days, Sarah and Cooper pored over their evidence. Henry's journal, the bank documents, the sheriff's ledger. Gradually, a clear picture emerged of the Covenant's operations. It had begun shortly after the war when Judge Burke and 3 other men, all of them Union officers, had seen opportunity in the chaos of Reconstruction. They'd established themselves in Redemption Creek, using their military connections to gain positions of power. From there, they'd built their empire through a combination of legitimate business interests and increasingly bold criminal enterprises. Land theft was their first venture. Cooper explained, showing Sarah a map he'd been assembling. They manipulated property records, forced out rightful owners, then resold the land at inflated prices, and the money laundering through the bank. Sarah asked came later when they expanded into more lucrative areas. Cooper hesitated. The Covenant has interests in gambling, houses, opium dens, and brothels throughout the territory. The bank provides a way to make dirty money look clean. Sarah studied the map. And my brother discovered all this. He found the financial connections. The ledgers showed money moving in patterns that made no sense for legitimate business. When he started tracking the funds, he discovered links to Burke and the others. So they had him killed. It wasn't a question. Cooper nodded grimly. Henry became a liability they couldn't afford. Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily. And Harmon, where does he fit in? Burke's enforcer, former cavalry like your husband, but with none of the honor, he handles the tasks that require direct action. A cold rage settled in Sarah's chest. Then he's our first target. Cooper frowned. Target Mrs. Calloway. I thought we agreed on bringing evidence to the governor. That's the end game, Mr. Cooper. But first we cut off the arms. Remember, Harmon is Burke's right hand. Without him, the Covenant loses its muscle. And how exactly do you propose to cut him off? Sarah began cleaning James's rifle. Her movements methodical. We draw him out, away from Burke's protection, and then we take him. Take him, you mean capture him, or kill him, whichever becomes necessary. Cooper stood abruptly. I won't be party to murder Mrs. Calloway, no matter how justified it might seem. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes hard. Was it murder when they killed Henry or Marshall Jackson? This is war, Mr. Cooper, and in war soldiers die. We're not soldiers, and this isn't war. It's justice. We're after justice. Sarah laughed bitterly. There's no justice in this county, not with Burke controlling the courts, Miller controlling the law. The only justice we'll find is what we make ourselves. Cooper studied her face, seeing something that troubled him deeply. You're beginning to sound like them. No, they kill for power, for greed. I seek justice for Henry. But even as she said it, Sarah felt a sliver of doubt. Was this really about justice anymore, or had it become something darker? Their argument was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Sarah grabbed her rifle while Cooper peered through the window. It's Martinez, he said with relief. The rancher dismounted, his expression grim. Sheriff's men are asking questions about you two, searching farms, checking hotels. They found your horses at my stable. Did they follow you? Sarah asked. Martinez shook his head. I took precautions, but it's not safe here anymore. You need to move. Where? Cooper asked. Martinez hesitated. There's a place, old Apache cave system in the hills north of here. Not many white folks know about it. Sarah nodded. We'll leave at nightfall. After Martinez departed, they packed their meager belongings in silence, the tension of their earlier argument still hanging between them. I won't abandon our plan, Cooper said finally. The evidence goes to the governor. That's the only way to truly end this. And I won't let Henry's killers walk free a day longer than necessary, Sarah replied, but I'll help you get your evidence to the governor. After that, my path is my own. Cooper studied her, sensing the steel in her words. Fair enough, but remember what your husband believed in, justice, not vengeance. Sarah's hand went instinctively to James's last letter tucked inside her shirt. You didn't know my husband, Mr. Cooper. Perhaps not, but I knew your brother, and he believed the same. Before Sarah could respond, the distant crack of a rifle shot split the air. She moved to the window in time to see Martinez's horse galloping riderless down the trail. Ambush, she whispered, reaching for her rifle. Get down, Benoit. Cooper dropped to the floor just as bullets began tearing through the thin wooden walls of the shack. Sarah returned fire through the window, aiming at muzzle flashes on the ridge above. They've got us surrounded, Cooper shouted over the gunfire. At least 5 men from what I can see. Sarah mentally calculated their ammunition. Not enough for a prolonged firefight. The back door, she said. There's a gully that leads to the stream. If we can reach it, we might slip away in the darkness. What about our evidence? Sarah grabbed Henry's journal and the most damning of the bank documents, stuffing them inside her shirt. Grab what you can carry. The rest will have to leave. They made their move during a lull in the firing, slipping out the back door and into the deepening twilight. Sarah led the way, staying low, using the contours of the land for cover. Behind them, the firing resumed as their attackers realized the shack was empty. This way, Sarah hissed, pulling Cooper into a narrow ravine, just as riders appeared on the ridge above them. They pressed themselves against the rock wall, barely breathing as the men passed overhead. That was Harmon, Cooper whispered once they'd gone. He's leading them himself. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Burke would send his best for a task this important. They continued through the ravine until it opened into a broader valley. The cave Martinez had mentioned should be somewhere in the hills ahead, but in the gathering darkness, navigation was difficult. A shot rang out and Cooper grunted in pain, stumbling against Sarah. She caught him, feeling the warm wetness of blood soaking through his shirt. I'm hit, he gasped. Sarah dragged him behind a large boulder, just as more shots kicked up dirt around them. She returned fire, forcing their pursuers to take cover. How bad? She asked, examining Cooper's wound in the dim light. Shoulder. He managed through gritted teeth. Went through clean, I think. Sarah tore a strip from her undershirt and bound the wound as best she could. Can you walk? Cooper nodded, though his face was pale with pain. Not much choices there. They moved deeper into the hills, Sarah half carrying Cooper, whose strength was flagging with each step. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind them, but Sarah knew it was only temporary. Harmon wasn't a man who gave up easily. Just before midnight, they found the cave entrance, a narrow opening in the side of a cliff, partially hidden by brush. Inside, the space opened up into a larger chamber, mercifully dry and defensible. "Rest," Sarah told Cooper, helping him lie down against the cave wall. "I'll keep watch." She tended his wound more thoroughly, cleaning it with water from her canteen and rebinding it with strips of cloth from her shirt. The bullet had indeed passed through cleanly, but he'd lost a lot of blood, and infection was a serious concern in these conditions. Cooper slipped in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling names or phrases that made little sense to Sarah. During one lucid moment, he grabbed her arm. "If I don't make it," he said hoarsely, "the evidence has to reach Governor Wallace. He's the only one with the authority to stop Burke." "You'll deliver it yourself," Sarah replied firmly. Cooper shook his head weakly. "Promise me? Justice for Henry. The right way." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." Satisfied, Cooper drifted back into uneasy sleep. Sarah positioned herself near the cave entrance, rifle ready, and settled in for a long night. Dawn broke with no sign of Harmon and his men, but Sarah remained vigilant. Cooper's condition had worsened overnight. His wound was hot to the touch, his forehead burning with fever. He needed a doctor, and soon Sarah took stock of their situation. They had limited ammunition, no food, and Cooper was in no condition to travel far. The nearest town was Redemption Creek itself, where the Covenant would be watching for them. Their options were severely limited. As she was considering their next move, Cooper stirred, his eyes opening with surprising clarity. "We need to split up," he said, his voice stronger than she'd expected. "You're in no condition to travel alone," Sarah objected. "Which is why you need to go. Get the evidence to the governor. I'll only slow you down. I'm not leaving you here to die." Cooper managed a wry smile. "I'm tougher than I look, Mrs. Calloway, and we both know this is bigger than either of us. How want it?" Before Sarah could argue further, the sound of horses approaching echoed from outside. She moved to the cave entrance, careful to stay hidden, and saw 3 riders in the valley below. Not Harmon's men, their clothing and the pack horses they led marked them as traders, likely heading to one of the nearby reservations. "Apache traders," she whispered to Cooper. 3 men with pack horses. "Our way out," Cooper replied. "If they're willing to help." It was a risk approaching strangers when Harmon was hunting them, but Cooper needed medical attention, and the traders represented their best chance of escape. Sarah made her decision. She stepped out of the cave, keeping her rifle visible, but not aimed at the men, and called out. The traders stopped, immediately alert. "I need help," Sarah said, keeping her hands where they could see them. "My friend is wounded. We can pay." The traders conferred briefly, then the leader dismounted and approached her cautiously. He was an older man with a deeply lined face and shrewd eyes. "Who shot your friend?" he asked in accented English. "Bad men from Redemption Creek, the ones who steal land." The trader's expression hardened. The Covenant. Sarah nodded, surprised that their reputation extended even to the Apache. "We know them," the trader said grimly. "They take Apache land too many times." He examined Cooper's wound while his companions kept watch. "Fever bad, need medicine." "Can you help us?" Sarah asked. The trader considered, then nodded. "We take you to our camp medicine there, then to Fort Stanton Army doctor." Cooper stirred. "Not Fort Stanton. Too risky. Burke has influence there." The trader seemed to understand. "Then Santa Fe governor there." 3 days' ride, Sarah and Cooper exchanged looks. Santa Fe, where Governor Wallace resided. It was perfect. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "Santa Fe." The traders helped Cooper onto one of their pack horses, and they set off following game trails that didn't appear on any map. Sarah rode beside the leader, a man who introduced himself as Nakos. "Why help us?" she asked after they'd been traveling for several hours. Nakos glanced at her. "Covenant men kill my brother last winter. Take his land. No justice from white man's law." Sarah nodded in understanding. "My brother too." The journey was difficult. Cooper's condition fluctuated. Sometimes he seemed on the verge of recovery, other times delirious with fever. The Apache camp provided medicine that helped stabilize him, but it was clear he needed proper medical attention. On the second night as they camped in a hidden valley, Nakos approached Sarah with news. Riders following 6 men. One has scar on face. Harmon, he'd somehow picked up their trail. How far behind, Sarah asked, half-day's ride. But they not know these trails like we do. Sarah considered their options. We need to split up. They're tracking both of us. If we separate, one might get through. Nakos nodded in understanding. You go with Tarek. He indicated the youngest of the traders. Take mountain trail to Santa Fe. Very hard path. Horses of white men cannot follow. And Cooper? I take him east, then north, longer way. Draw hunters away from you. It was a solid plan, but it meant entrusting Cooper and the remaining evidence to Nakos. Sarah hesitated, but Cooper himself settled the matter. Do it, he said weakly from his bedroll. The journal is most important. It has names, dates, everything. Get it to Governor Wallace. Sarah knelt beside him. And you? What if Harmon catches up to you? Cooper managed a grim smile. Then I'll finally get my interview with the notorious Jake Harmon. Sarah didn't return his smile. This isn't a joke, Cooper. No, it's not, but it is the right choice. He gripped her arm with surprising strength. Remember your promise. Justice, not vengeance. Sarah nodded, though the distinction seemed increasingly blurred in her mind. I'll see you in Santa Fe, she said, hoping it wasn't a lie. They parted ways before dawn, Sarah and Tarek taking the treacherous mountain trail west, while Nakos and the other trader headed east with Cooper. The plan was to rendezvous in Santa Fe in 4 days at a cantina Nakos knew near the governor's mansion. The mountain trail was as difficult as Nakos had worn narrow paths along sheer cliffs passages so tight they had to dismount and lead the horses. But it was also beautifully desolate, a place where the Covenant's reach could not extend. On the second day, Tarek halted, suddenly gesturing for Sarah to be silent. He pointed to tracks crossing their path, unshod ponies and moccasined feet. Comanche, he whispered. War party, very dangerous. Sarah felt a chill. Comanche. Raiders were feared throughout the territory, known for their ferocity and skill in combat. If they were caught between Harmon and a Comanche war party, their chances of reaching Santa Fe were slim. They altered their course, taking an even more circuitous route through the mountains. It added another day to their journey, but safety was worth the delay. That night, as they camped in a sheltered canyon, Tarek shared his dried meat and hard bread with Sarah. They sat in comfortable silence, two people united by common enemies, if not common backgrounds. You hunt the scarred man, Tarek said eventually. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. He killed my brother. The hunt changes the hunter. Tarek said cryptically, my grandfather was a great warrior. He said this, when you track the wolf too long, you become the wolf. Sarah thought of the young outlaw she'd shot at the mining camp, of the coldness that had settled in her chest since Henry's death. Was she becoming like Harmon? Like the men of the Covenant? Sometimes the wolf must be stopped, she said finally, no matter the cost. Tarek studied her, his dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. There is always cost, he agreed. Question is who pays? The next morning they resumed their journey, pushing the horses as hard as they dared on the difficult terrain. According to Tarek, they would reach Santa Fe by nightfall if they maintained their pace. As the sun began its descent, they emerged from the mountains onto a plateau overlooking the Rio Grande Valley. In the distance, the adobe buildings of Santa Fe glowed golden in the late afternoon light. We made it, Sarah breathed, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Tarek nodded, but his expression remained cautious. Journey not over until inside city walls. They descended toward the valley, taking a rarely used trail that would bring them to the city from the west, away from the main roads where Harmon might have posted watchers. As they approached the outskirts of Santa Fe, Sarah felt increasingly exposed. After days in the wilderness, the open terrain around the city seemed to offer too little cover, too many opportunities for ambush. Her instincts proved correct. They were less than a mile from the city when Tarek suddenly stiffened, then toppled from his horse, an arrow protruding from his chest. Sarah reacted instantly, diving from her saddle as more arrows whistled past. She rolled behind a low stone wall, drawing James's revolver as she moved. 3 riders appeared on the ridge behind them, not Harmon's men but Comanche warriors painted for war. The war party Tarek had warned about had found them after all. Sarah fired twice, causing the warriors to veer away and seek cover. She used the momentary reprieve to check Tarek, but it was immediately clear that he was beyond help. The arrow had pierced his heart. Grabbing Henry's journal from Tarek's saddlebag, Sarah prepared to make a run for the city. She had maybe half a mile to cover over open ground with 3 Comanche warriors in pursuit. The odds were not in her favor, but she had come too far to fail now. Taking a deep breath, she broke cover, running in a zigzag pattern toward the city. Behind her, war cries erupted as the Comanche gave chase. An arrow grazed her arm, another tore through her skirt. Sarah kept running, her lungs burning, the city walls seeming impossibly distant. Then from ahead came the thunder of hooves. A patrol of U.S. cavalry emerged from the city gates, rifles ready. The Comanche, seeing themselves outnumbered, wheeled and retreated toward the mountains. Sarah collapsed to her knees as the soldiers reached her Henry's journal, clutched tightly to her chest. She had made it to Santa Fe. The evidence was safe, but at what cost? Martinez shot, Cooper wounded, Tarek dead. The trail of bodies behind her grew longer with each passing day. As the soldiers helped her to her feet, Sarah wondered if Tarek had been right. In hunting the wolf, had she become the wolf herself? The cantina was dimly lit and smelled of tobacco and cheap whiskey. Sarah sat at a corner table, nursing a glass of tequila. She had no intention of drinking. It was their agreed meeting place, but there was still no sign of Cooper or Nakos, and they were now a day overdue. She had spent the intervening time recovering from her journey and making discreet inquiries about Governor Wallace. He was indeed in residence, but obtaining an audience was proving difficult. Without Cooper's press credentials, she was just another supplicant seeking the governor's attention. The cantina door opened, admitting a gust of evening air and a familiar figure. Sarah's hand moved to her revolver, but she relaxed when she recognized Nakos. He spotted her and made his way to her table, his expression grim. "Cooper?" Sarah asked immediately. Nakos shook his head. "Taken Harmon's men, found us near Pecos River. Cooper told me to run. Bring this." He handed her a small packet, Cooper's notes on the Covenant, the pages stained with what looked like blood. Sarah felt a cold rage building inside her. Is he alive? Yes, they take him, not kill him. Want information, I think. Where? Back to Redemption Creek. Heard them say the judge wants him. Burke. Of course, he would want to know exactly what evidence they had. Who else knew about the Covenant? I need to go back, Sarah said half to herself. Nakos looked alarmed. Very dangerous. Many men hunt you there. I can't leave Cooper to them. And the evidence? She gestured to Henry's journal and the packet Nakos had delivered. It's not enough. We need Cooper's testimony, his credibility as a journalist. Then we go together, Nakos said firmly. My brother's spirit not rest until Covenant men pay. Sarah studied him, seeing the same determination that drove her. It will be dangerous. Nakos smiled grimly. Life is dangerous, death certain. Justice worth risk. They spent the night planning their return to Redemption Creek. Direct confrontation was out of the question. The Covenant had too many men, too much power. They needed stealth surprise and, as Nakos put it, the wisdom of the fox, not the courage of the bear. Their best opportunity would come at Judge Burke's upcoming gala, the same event Cooper had mentioned before their flight. According to Nakos, who had gathered information in Santa Fe, it was still scheduled for 3 days hence. All important people will be there. Nakos explained. Governor Wallace even invited, though he not attend. Sarah saw the potential immediately. With all of the Covenant gathered in one place, they could potentially free Cooper and gather the final evidence they needed. I'll need a dress, she mused, and away into the mansion. Nakos nodded. I know man in Redemption Creek, makes deliveries to Judge's house. He helped. By dawn, their plan was set. They would travel separately to reduce the chance of detection. Nakos would return first, contact his ally, and arrange for Sarah's entry to the gala. Sarah would follow a day later, approaching the town from the west, avoiding the main roads. As they prepared to part ways, Nakos handed Sarah a small leather pouch. Medicine, he explained. If Cooper hurt bad, Sarah tucked it into her pocket. Thank you, Nakos, for everything. No thanks needed. Common enemy makes brothers and sisters of us all. Sarah watched him ride away, wondering if she would ever see him again. The odds were against all of them now, but then the odds had been against her since the day Henry died. The return journey to Redemption Creek was tense but uneventful. Sarah approached from the west as planned, using the cover of a cattle drive to slip back into the county unnoticed. She found lodging at a small farm outside town owned by an elderly widow who asked no questions when Sarah paid for a week's stay in advance. The night before the gala, Nakos appeared at the farm, bringing with him a package and news. Cooper alive, he reported, kept in jail cellar. Many guards, Adam and Burke Harmon, at mansion preparing for big party. Many important guests coming. Have you found me a way in? Nakos nodded. My friend works in kitchen. He get you in as serving girl. But after that, you alone. Sarah opened the package he'd brought. Inside was a plain black dress, the kind worn by housemaids at wealthy establishments. Beneath it lay something more surprising, a small Derringer pistol easily concealed in a pocket or sleeve. 2 shots only, Nakos warned. Choose targets well. Sarah examined the tiny gun. It wasn't much, but in close quarters it could be deadly effective. What about you? Where will you be? Outside jail, creating distraction. Nakos smiled, and for the first time Sarah saw the warrior beneath the trader's calm exterior. Much fire, much noise, guards look outside, not inside. And after, if we succeed, meet at Martinez's ranch. No one there now, safe place to hide until can reach governor. Sarah nodded. It was a sound plan, as good as they could hope for under the circumstances, but so much could go wrong if she was discovered at the mansion, if Nakos's distraction failed, if Cooper was too injured to travel. We may not all survive this, she said quietly. Nakos shrugged. All die someday. Better to die for something than nothing. Words James might have spoken, Sarah thought words Henry would have understood. After Nakos left, Sarah prepared herself mentally for what was to come. She cleaned James's revolver, though she wouldn't be taking it to the gala, too bulky to conceal under a maid's dress. The Derringer would have to suffice. She read through Henry's journal one more time, committing the most damning details to memory. If something happened to the physical evidence, she wanted to ensure the truth about the covenant could still be told. As she was replacing the journal in its hiding place, a loose page fell out, a letter in Henry's handwriting that she hadn't noticed before. It was addressed to her, dated the day before his death. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then what I fear has come to pass. Judge Burke and his men are not the pillars of society they pretend to be. They're criminals, Sarah, responsible for more suffering than you can imagine. I've sent evidence to Marshal Jackson, but I fear it may not be enough. Burke's influence extends far beyond Redemption Creek. That's why I've also been working with a journalist named Matthew Cooper. If anything happens to me, seek him out. He can be trusted. I know you, sister. I know the rage that will fill your heart if these men harm me. But remember what James always said, justice, not vengeance. Don't let them turn you into something you're not. I love you, Sarah. I'm sorry for any pain my actions may cause you. Your brother Henry. Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her shirt next to James's last letter. 2 men she had loved, both preaching the same message, both dead because of it. Justice, not vengeance, she whispered to the empty room. But the line between the two had never seemed so blurred. Judge William Burke's mansion stood atop the highest hill in Redemption Creek, a monument to wealth and power in a county where most people struggled to make ends meet. Built in the Southern plantation style, a nod to Burke's Virginia heritage, it featured white columns, broad verandas, and manicured gardens that seemed wildly out of place in the rugged New Mexico territory. Sarah approached from the servant's entrance at the rear, dressed in the plain black dress Nakos had provided, her hair covered by a white cap. A Mexican woman met her at the door, the cook's assistant, according to Nakos's plan. You're late, the woman said curtly, handing Sarah a serving tray. Guests are already arriving. Stay in the kitchen unless called for, and don't speak unless spoken to. Sarah nodded meekly, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd seen servants do in wealthy homes. The kitchen was a hive of activity cooks, preparing elaborate dishes, servers arranging hors d'oeuvres on silver platters, a harried butler barking orders in all directions. She positioned herself near the door that led to the main house, waiting for an opportunity to slip away unnoticed. According to Nako's information, Burke's study was on the second floor at the end of the east wing. That's where she would find the evidence Cooper had mentioned, the complete records of the Covenant's operations kept in Burke's personal safe. The difficulty would be reaching it undetected and then opening the safe itself. For the former, she would rely on the distraction of the gala. For the latter, she would need the combination which, according to Henry's journal, Burke kept written in a coded notation in his desk drawer. Henry had cracked the code during his investigation, and the combination was recorded in his journal, now safely hidden in Sarah's undergarments. Her opportunity came when a tray of champagne flutes needed delivery to the main salon. Sarah volunteered, keeping her face turned away from the butler as he handed her the tray. The main salon was crowded with Redemption Creek's elite merchants, landowners, politicians, all dressed in their finest attire. Sarah moved through the crowd, carefully offering champagne while studying faces. She recognized Sheriff Miller immediately, his bulldog face flushed with drink, as he laughed too loudly at something a companion said. Nearby stood Mayor Thompson, corpulent and sweating in an expensive suit, and there by the grand fireplace was Judge Burke himself. He was taller than Sarah had expected, with silver hair and the ramrod straight posture of a military man. His face was handsome in a severe way, with deep-set eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone they fell upon. He was currently engaged in conversation with a man whose back was to Sarah, but something about the set of those shoulders made her pulse quicken. The man turned slightly and Sarah's suspicion was confirmed. Jake Harmon. The scar on his face was even more pronounced in the bright light of the salon, a jagged line from ear to chin that twisted his otherwise handsome features into something feral. Sarah averted her gaze as Harmon's eyes swept the room, continuing her circuit with the champagne tray. As she passed near Burke and Harmon, she caught fragments of their conversation. Still not talking, Harmon was saying, but he will. They all do eventually. Time is a concern, Burke replied, his voice cultured, almost gentle. The governor's office has been making inquiries. If Wallace gets involved, he won't, Harmon cut in. The journalist has no proof without the woman and the documents, and we'll find her. My men are searching every farm, every settlement within 50 miles. Sarah moved away before she could hear more. Her mind racing. Cooper was still alive but being interrogated. And the governor was already asking questions. Perhaps the evidence they'd managed to send had made an impact after all. She completed her circuit of the room, then returned to the kitchen for a fresh tray. This time she took a different door out, one that led to a hallway connecting the main salon to the dining room. From there she could access the grand staircase to the second floor. The hallway was momentarily empty, and Sarah seized her chance. She abandoned the tray on a side table and ascended the stairs quickly, keeping close to the wall where the risers were less likely to creak. The second floor was dimly lit, with most of the activity centered downstairs. She moved down the corridor, counting doors until she reached the one that should lead to Burke's study. It was locked. Sarah withdrew a hairpin from beneath her cap, a trick James had taught her during the war, when they'd sometimes needed to access locked medicine cabinets in field hospitals. The lock was simple, and within moments she felt the satisfying click of the tumbler giving way. Burke's study was a testament to the man's self-importance. Leather-bound books lined the walls, a massive desk dominated the center of the room, and hunting trophies, the heads of deer, elk, and one massive grizzly stared glassily from the walls. Sarah moved immediately to the desk, searching the drawers for the coded notation Henry had described. She found it in the top right drawer, a series of numbers that appeared to be dates, but were actually the combination to the safe hidden behind a painting of Burke in his Union Army uniform. She was reaching for the painting when a sound from the hallway froze her in place. Voices approaching the study. Sarah looked frantically for a hiding place, finally ducking behind the heavy velvet curtains at the window just as the door opened. "Need to move up our timetable," Burke was saying as he entered. "If Wallace suspects anything—" "He suspects nothing," another voice replied. Not Harmon's, this one was older, frailer. My contacts in Santa Fe assure me the governor is focused entirely on Apache troubles to the south. And what of the woman Calloway's sister, a grieving widow who's lost her mind with rage? If she appears, who would believe her over us? There was a pause, and Sarah could hear the sound of liquid being poured into glasses. A toast of some kind. To the covenant, Burke said, and to 10 more prosperous years. The covenant, the other voice echoed. The men continued talking, but Sarah was distracted by a new sensation. Something cold and hard pressing against her back through the curtain. Don't move, a voice whispered, barely audible. It's me, Cooper. Sarah nearly gasped aloud in shock. Cooper. Here, how was that possible? When I count to 3, he continued in that same ghostly whisper, we move 1, 2, 3. Fulminum, the curtains were yanked aside, and Sarah found herself staring not at Matthew Cooper, but at Jake Harmon, his scarred face twisted in a triumphant smile. Judge, he called, look what I found hiding behind your curtains. Burke turned, his expression changing from surprise to cold calculation as he recognized Sarah. Mrs. Calloway, he said smoothly, what an unexpected pleasure. Though I must say that uniform doesn't suit you. Sarah's hand moved toward the hidden derringer, but Harmon was faster, grabbing her wrist in a grip like iron. I wouldn't, he warned, his voice almost gentle. The judge doesn't like blood on his carpets. Burke approached, studying Sarah with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. We've been looking for you, Mrs. Calloway. Your friend Mr. Cooper has been most uncooperative about your whereabouts. Cooper is alive, Sarah couldn't help asking. For now, Burke replied with a slight smile, though his continued survival depends largely on what you can tell us. For instance, where are the documents you stole from Sheriff Miller's office and Henry's journal? Sarah kept her face impassive. I don't know what you're talking about, Burke sighed theatrically. Please, Mrs. Calloway, let's not waste time with denials. We know you have evidence against the covenant. We know you tried to reach Governor Wallace. What we don't know is whether you succeeded and exactly what evidence remains out there. The older man, whom Sarah now recognized as George Carson, the cattle baron, spoke up. We can make this easy or hard, Mrs. Calloway. Your choice. Where is Cooper? Sarah demanded. Burke smiled thinly. Being our guest in a somewhat less comfortable room than this one. He's quite resilient, I must say. Former military. Journalist, Sarah spat. Just a journalist trying to uncover the truth about what you did to my brother. Ah, Henry. Burke nodded. A shame that he was a good bookkeeper, but he became problematic. He discovered you were using the bank to launder money from your criminal enterprises. Sarah stated flatly. Burke laughed. Criminal. My dear, we built this county from nothing. The businesses we control provide employment stability. Yes, some of our methods might not withstand the harsh light of public scrutiny, but the results speak for themselves. Redemption Creek prospers while other settlements fail. You're murderers, Sarah said, her voice cold. Henry Marshall, Jackson, how many others? Regrettable necessities. Burke waved a hand dismissively. The price of progress, I'm afraid. Harmon, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly tightened his grip on Sarah's wrist. Judge, we're wasting time. The gala is in full swing downstairs. People will notice your absence soon. Burke nodded. You're right, of course, Mrs. Calloway. I'm afraid we'll have to continue this conversation elsewhere. Jake, take her to join Mr. Cooper. Perhaps together they'll be more forthcoming. As Harmon began to pull her toward the door, Sarah made her move. She stomped hard on his instep, simultaneously twisting in his grip and reaching for the derringer with her free hand. Harmon grunted in pain but didn't release her. Instead, he slammed her against the bookcase, knocking the wind from her lungs. The derringer clattered to the floor, unfired. Nice try. Harmon hissed, his face inches from hers. But I've been doing this a lot longer than you, Mrs. Calloway. A commotion from downstairs interrupted the struggle shouts, then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. What the hell? Carson exclaimed, moving to the window. Burke remained calm. It seems Mrs. Calloway didn't come alone. Jake, secure her. I'll deal with our guests. Harmon produced a set of handcuffs and roughly secured Sarah's wrists behind her back, As he did, he leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "I remember your husband," he whispered, "Captain James Calloway. Self-righteous bastard, always talking about honor duty. Look where it got him." Sarah went rigid with shock. "You knew James," Harmon chuckled. "Knew him. I served under him for 2 years. I was there when he died, or rather, when I killed him." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. "What are you saying?" "Your husband didn't die heroically in battle, Mrs. Calloway. He died because he discovered something he shouldn't have the beginnings of. The Covenant, Burke couldn't allow that information to spread, so he gave the order, and I carried it out." Sarah lunged at him, handcuffs or no, but Harmon easily sidestepped her attack. He grabbed her by the throat, pushing her back against the bookcase. "8 years I've carried that secret," he continued, his voice almost conversational, despite the chaos erupting downstairs. "And now you'll die knowing the truth. Poetic, don't you think?" Before Sarah could respond, the study door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, his face flushed with exertion. Judge Indians attacking the house. At least a dozen of them, led by that traitor, Martinez, was harboring narcos. His distraction had arrived, though it sounded more like a full-scale assault than the diversion they'd planned. Burke remained unruffled. "Calm yourself, Frank. We have armed men throughout the property. Deal with the intruders. But, sir, they've already breached the outer perimeter, and they've freed the prisoner." That got Burke's attention. "Cooper is free." "Yes, sir. He was being brought to the house as you ordered when the attack began. They overwhelmed the deputies and took him." Burke's composed facade finally cracked, revealing the cold rage beneath. "Find him. Find them all. No one leaves this property alive. Do you understand?" Miller nodded and withdrew. Burke turned to Harmon. "Change of plans. Kill Mrs. Calloway now, then join the defense. We can't risk her escaping as well." Harmon smiled, drawing his revolver. "With pleasure, Judge." Sarah stared into the barrel of the gun, her mind racing. After everything, Henry Cooper, the evidence was this, how it would end. Shot like a dog in Burke's study, with the truth about James's death revealed only moments before her own. The sound of a window shattering saved her life. Something small and smoking sailed into the study, landing at Burke's feet. "Grenade!" Harmon shouted, diving for cover. It wasn't a grenade, but a homemade smoke bomb, one of Nakos's creations. Dense, acrid smoke filled the room in seconds, sending Burke and Carson into coughing fits. Harmon, better trained, held his breath and kept his gun trained in Sarah's direction. But in the thick smoke, precise aim was impossible. Sarah dropped to the floor, rolling toward where she'd last seen the Derringer. Her fingers, still cuffed behind her back, closed around the small pistol just as a figure loomed through the smoke. "Sarah!" Cooper's voice, hoarse but unmistakable. "This way." She staggered toward his voice, staying low where the smoke was thinnest. A hand gripped her arm, pulling her toward the shattered window. "Can't go downstairs," Cooper wheezed. "Too many of them." Outside the window was a narrow ledge leading to a drain pipe that descended to the gardens below. Cooper helped Sarah through the window, then followed both of them, clinging precariously to the ledge as gunfire erupted behind them. Harmon appeared at the window, his face a mask of fury through the dissipating smoke. He fired twice the bullets, chipping stone inches from Sarah's head. Before he could fire again, another smoke bomb sailed through the air, exploding against the window frame and driving him back below. Sarah could see Nakos and several Apache warriors engaged in battle with Burke's men. It wasn't a fair fight, the warriors were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a ferocity that had Burke's men retreating toward the house. "We need to get down there." Cooper gasped, his face pale with pain. Sarah could see blood seeping through his shirt. His old wound reopened in the escape. "The drain pipe." She indicated with her head, her hands still cuffed behind her back. "Can you make it?" Cooper nodded grimly. "You first, I'll follow." Sarah inched toward the drain pipe, acutely aware of the 30-foot drop beneath her. With her hands cuffed, the descent would be treacherous at best, suicidal at worst, but staying meant certain death at Harmon's hands. She reached the pipe and wrapped her legs around it, beginning a painful slide downward. The metal dug into her thighs, and without her hands for balance, she descended faster than intended. 10 feet from the ground, she lost her grip entirely, and fell landing hard on her side in a flower bed. Cooper followed more controlled, but clearly in agony. He dropped the last few feet, collapsing beside her with a grunt of pain. "Keys?" Sarah gasped, nodding toward his pocket. "For the cuffs." Cooper fumbled in his pocket, producing a small ring of keys. "Courtesy of my jailer," he explained, unlocking her restraints with shaking hands. "He won't be needing them anymore." Free at last, Sarah helped Cooper to his feet. They moved toward the cover of a small gazebo as gunfire intensified around the front of the mansion. "Narcos," Sarah called softly. As if summoned by her voice, the Apache trader appeared beside them, moving silently despite the chaos. "Come," he said urgently. "Way clear to West Side horses, waiting." "What about the evidence?" Cooper asked. "Burke's safe." "No time." Narcos cut him off. "Too many men need to go now." "Aaron." Sarah hesitated, thinking of Henry's journal, hidden on her person, of the evidence they'd worked so hard to gather. Without Burke's complete records, would it be enough? A bullet splintered the gazebo's wooden railing, deciding the matter for her. Narcos was right. They had to retreat or die here. They followed him through the gardens, staying low, using ornamental shrubs for cover. The fighting was concentrated at the front of the mansion, drawing most of Burke's men away from their escape route. They had nearly reached the property's western boundary when a figure stepped out from behind a tree, rifle raised. "Hello, Sarah," Jake Harmon said calmly. "Going somewhere?" Narcos reached for his knife, but Harmon's rifle shifted slightly. "Try it, Indian, and I'll put a hole through your chest." Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Harmon and her companions. "Let them go, Jake. This is between you and me now." Harmon's scarred face twisted in a humorless smile. "Because of your husband, ancient history, Mrs. Calloway." "You murdered him," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "On Burke's orders." "I followed orders," Harmon corrected. "Just like your precious, James always preached. Duty, honor, obedience." "James stood for justice," Sarah countered. "Something you wouldn't understand." Harmon's smile faded. "Justice? There's no justice in this world, only power. The Covenant understood that after the war, we built something here, something that works. Your husband couldn't see that. Neither could your brother. So you killed them both. Like I said, necessary sacrifices for the greater good." As they spoke, Sarah was acutely aware of Cooper slowly inching his hand toward his waistband, where she glimpsed the butt of a revolver. Narcos, too, was tensing, ready to move. She needed to keep Harmon talking, keep his attention fixed on her. "Tell me how you did it," she demanded. "How you killed James. I deserve to know that much." Something flickered in Harmon's eyes, pride perhaps, or the desire to boast of a deed long kept secret. "It was during the Chattanooga campaign. Your husband discovered some of us were diverting Union supplies to the black market. Quite the operation we had going, made us all rich while soldiers went hungry. James would never have stood for that," Sarah said, remembering her husband's unwavering integrity. "No, he wouldn't," Harmon agreed. "Threatened to report us to the general. So during the fighting, when bullets were flying from all directions," he shrugged. "One more dead officer, nobody asked questions." The casual cruelty of it struck Sarah like a physical blow. All these years she'd imagined James dying heroically, to learn he'd been murdered by his own men. And Burke, she managed. "How does he fit into this?" "The judge was our supplier, Army quartermaster then, with access to everything. After the war, he saw opportunity here in the territories, invited us all to join him, a brotherhood, he called it, the Covenant." As Harmon spoke, Cooper's hand had almost reached his gun, just a few more seconds. "Enough talk," Harmon said suddenly, his rifle barrel steadying. "Time to join your husband and brother, Mrs. Calloway. For now." Three things happened simultaneously. Cooper drew his revolver, Narcos hurled his knife, and Sarah dove to the side. Harmon fired the bullet, grazing Sarah's arm as she moved. Cooper's shot went wide as he stumbled from his wound, but Narcos's knife found its mark, burying itself in Harmon's shoulder. Harmon roared in pain but maintained his grip on the rifle, swinging it toward Narcos. Sarah, acting on instinct, tackled him before he could fire. They crashed to the ground, grappling for control of the weapon. Despite her fury, Sarah was no match for Harmon's strength. He pinned her beneath him, his hands moving to her throat As he squeezed, Sarah's vision began to darken at the edges. Should have stayed a grieving widow. Harmon hissed, his face inches from hers. Sarah's hand scrabbled desperately in the dirt beside her fingers, closing around a rock. With the last of her strength, she smashed it against Harmon's wounded shoulder. He howled, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to gasp a breath. Then a gunshot echoed and Harmon's weight suddenly went slack above her. Cooper stood over them, his revolver still smoking. "That's for James Calloway," he said quietly, "and Henry. And every other life you've destroyed." Narcos pulled Harmon's body off Sarah, helping her to her feet. Blood soaked her sleeve where the bullet had grazed her, and bruises were already forming on her throat. But she was alive. "We go," Narcos insisted. "More men coming." Sarah stared down at Harmon's body, at the face that had haunted her nightmares since Henry's death. The face of the man who had murdered her husband. There should have been satisfaction in his death, a sense of justice served. Instead, she felt only emptiness. "Sarah," Cooper urged, swaying slightly from his own wound. "We need to move." She nodded, turning away from Harmon's body. "Let's go." Hanarinahim. They reached the horses Narcos had waiting, mounting quickly despite their injuries. As they rode away from Burke's mansion, Sarah looked back one last time. Flames were now visible at the front of the house. Narcos's warriors had set fire to the stables and outer buildings before retreating. It was a fitting symbol, she thought, the Covenant's seat of power burning in the night. But Burke himself had escaped along with most of his inner circle. Their work was far from finished. They rode through the night, avoiding main trails, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. By dawn, they had reached Martinez's abandoned ranch, where they finally stopped to tend their wounds and plan their next move. Cooper's condition was worrying. The bullet wound in his shoulder had reopened during their escape and was showing signs of infection. Sarah cleaned it as best she could with the limited supplies they had, using the medicine Narcos had given her. "You should have been a doctor, not a nurse," Cooper commented weakly as she finished bandaging his shoulder. Sarah managed a small smile. "James used to say the same thing, but in those days women weren't allowed in medical school." "James sounds like a good man," Cooper said. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Sarah replied, surprised to find she meant it. "You share the same principles." Narcos appeared in the doorway of the small ranch house. "Riders coming," he reported. "Many men. 2 miles away." Sarah moved to the window, peering out at the dust cloud visible on the horizon. "Burke's men." "Yes, Sheriff Miller leading them." Cooper struggled to sit up. "We need to go now." "You're in no condition to travel," Sarah objected. "Neither are you," he countered, nodding at her injured arm. "But if we stay, we die." Narcos shook his head. "Too late to run. Horses tired, men too close." Sarah considered their options. The ranch house was indefensible, a single-story structure with too many windows and doors. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and injured. The situation seemed hopeless. Then her eyes fell on Henry's journal lying on the table beside her. The evidence they'd gathered at such cost. If they died here, the truth died with them. "Narcos," she said suddenly. "How far to the nearest telegraph office?" 12 miles. "Santa Rosa." Sarah nodded, a plan forming. "One of us needs to get this evidence to Santa Fe, to Governor Wallace." "I'll go." Cooper volunteered immediately. "No," Sarah shook her head. "You're too badly wounded. You wouldn't make it." "And you would," Cooper challenged. "With that arm?" "I'm not going either," Sarah said. She turned to Narcos. "You're the only one who can make it through. You know the country better than any of us." Narcos looked uncertain. "Leave you to fight alone." "We'll buy you time," Sarah said firmly. "Get the journal and Cooper's notes to Santa Fe. Everything depends on it." Cooper began to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "It's the only way. If we all stay and fight, we all die, and Burke wins. This way, at least the truth has a chance." Narcos studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I go, but need diversion when they arrive." "You'll have it," Sarah promised. They worked quickly, gathering the evidence into a waterproof pouch for Narcos. Sarah added James's last letter and a note of her own explaining everything that had happened since Henry's death. Cooper contributed his notebook and what remained of his press credentials. Tell Governor Wallace I'll be along shortly to corroborate everything, he said with a grim smile that acknowledged the unlikelihood of that outcome. Nakos prepared to leave through the back of the property, where a narrow trail led into the hills, difficult terrain for Burke's men to follow, especially if they were occupied with Sarah and Cooper at the ranch house. Before he departed, Nakos clasped Sarah's hand. You are a brave woman, Sarah Calloway. Your husband, your brother, their spirits will rest now. Sarah squeezed his hand in return. Thank you for everything, Nakos. Now go quickly. As Nakos slipped away, Sarah and Cooper prepared their defense of the ranch house. They had Cooper's revolver with 4 bullets, remaining a shotgun with a handful of shells that they'd found in the house, and Sarah's Derringer, which she'd managed to recover during their escape. Not much of an arsenal, Cooper observed dryly. We don't need to win, Sarah reminded him. Just buy time. They positioned themselves at opposite ends of the house, Sarah, taking the front where most of Miller's men would approach Cooper, covering the rear in case they tried to circle around. The riders were close now, close enough that Sarah could make out individual figures. Sheriff Miller at the lead, flanked by his deputies. Behind them, more men, ranch hands, and townspeople pressed into service, most looking uncomfortable with the rifles they carried. And there at the back of the group, mounted on a white horse that seemed too delicate for his bulk, was Judge William Burke himself. Sarah felt a cold rage at the sight of him. This man had ordered James's death, had sanctioned. Henry's murder, had built an empire on corruption and suffering. If she was going to die today, she would make sure Burke died with her. Here they come, she called to Cooper as the riders approached the ranch house. Get ready. Sheriff Miller halted his men about 50 yards from the house. Sarah Calloway, he bellowed. Matthew Cooper, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Sarah remained silent, her shotgun trained on Miller's broad chest. You're outnumbered 20-1. Miller continued. There's no escape surrender now, and the judge promises you'll get a fair trial. Cooper laughed bitterly from his position. About as fair as my brother's trial, he called back. Sarah turned in surprise. Brother. Cooper nodded grimly. Henry, we had different mothers. Burke didn't know the connection. I changed my name years ago to investigate him without suspicion. The revelation stunned Sarah Henry's brother. All this time before she could process this information, Miller's voice came again. Last chance. Come out now, or we're coming in. Sarah steadied the shotgun. Do what you have to do. Sheriff, she shouted back. We're not surrendering. Siri. Miller gestured, and his men spread out, taking cover behind water troughs, fences, and outbuildings. The battle for Martinez's ranch had begun. The first volley of shots shattered windows and splintered wood around Sarah. She waited for a lull, then fired the shotgun, forcing 2 deputies to duck behind a wagon. Cooper's revolver cracked from the rear of the house, followed by a cry of pain. 1 down, many to go. For several minutes, the exchange of gunfire continued. Sarah and Cooper were conservative with their limited ammunition, firing only when they had clear shots. But the weight of numbers was telling. Miller's men advanced steadily, tightening the noose around the ranch house. A bullet grazed Sarah's cheek, another tore through her already wounded arm. Cooper was hit again, a flesh wound to his leg that nonetheless reduced his mobility further. How much ammunition left? Cooper called over the gunfire. Sarah checked 2 shotgun shells, 1 in the Derringer. I'm down to my last round, Cooper reported grimly. Their situation was desperate. Miller's men were now close enough to rush the house, and they had almost no means left to repel them. Then from the direction Burke had been waiting came the sound of galloping hooves, not approaching, but retreating. Sarah risked a glance and saw the judge's white horse disappearing toward town. Burke hunched low in the saddle. The coward's running, she told Cooper with grim satisfaction, leaving his men to finish his dirty work, or going for reinforcements. Cooper suggested, either way, we're out of time. Sarah knew he was right. Nakos had been gone for almost an hour, enough of a head start she hoped to reach safety with the evidence. Their part was nearly done. Miller seemed to sense their weakening resistance. Prepare to storm the house, he ordered his men. Take them alive if possible. Sarah met Cooper's eyes across the room. In that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. They would not be taken alive to be questioned, by Burke and his men to be made examples of, like Henry Better to go down fighting. "It's been an honor, Mrs. Calloway," Cooper said formally. "Sarah," she corrected him, "and the honor has been mine, brother." Cooper smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed his pain-drawn face. "For Henry," he said, raising his revolver in salute. "For James," Sarah replied, lifting the shotgun, "for justice." As Miller's men rushed the house from all sides, Sarah and Cooper fired their last rounds. Men fell, but others kept coming. The door burst open and deputies poured in. Weapons raised, Sarah raised the empty shotgun, like a club determined to go down fighting. A rifle butt struck her arm, sending the shotgun flying. Another blow caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She fell to her knees, gasping. Across the room, Cooper was similarly overwhelmed, his wounded body unable to resist the onslaught. Sheriff Miller strode in, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "Got them both," he announced to someone outside. "Alive as ordered." To Sarah's surprise, it was not Burke who entered, but Mayor Thompson, sweating profusely in the morning heat. "Where's the judge?" Miller asked, clearly expecting Burke to make an appearance. Thompson looked uncomfortable. "Gone back to town, said to bring the prisoners to his mansion once you'd secured them." Miller frowned but nodded. "Bind their wounds enough to keep them alive for questioning. We need to know who else they've told about the covenant." As deputies roughly bandaged Sarah's injuries, her thoughts turned to Nakos. By now he should be well on his way to Santa Rosa, and from there to Santa Fe. The evidence would reach Governor Wallace. The truth would come out, even if she and Cooper didn't live to see it. This knowledge gave her a sense of peace, even as Miller's men dragged her and Cooper outside and threw them into a wagon for the journey back to Redemption Creek. Whatever happened next, the Covenant's days were numbered. Henry and James would have justice at last. The journey to Redemption Creek was a blur of pain and jostling motion. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of Cooper lying beside her. In the wagon, his breathing shallow but steady. When they arrived at Burke's mansion, the sun was high overhead. The damage from the previous night's attack was evident: charred outbuildings, broken windows, bullet holes in the once pristine white columns. Yet the main house still stood, a symbol of the Covenant's resilience. Miller and his men dragged Sarah and Cooper into the Grand Salon, where less than 24 hours earlier, the elite of Redemption Creek had gathered to celebrate Burke's power. Now it was transformed into an impromptu courtroom, with the judge himself seated in a high-backed chair like a throne. Burke's composure had slipped since Sarah had last seen him. His silver hair was disheveled, his clothing rumpled, and a tic had developed at the corner of his left eye. The Covenant's immaculate leader was showing cracks in his facade. "So," he said as Sarah and Cooper were forced to their knees before him, "the grieving widow and the crusading journalist, what a pair you make." Sarah met his gaze, steadily refusing to show fear despite her injuries. "It's over, Burke. You've lost." Burke laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Lost? Look around you, Mrs. Calloway. You're my prisoner, your Apache friend is being hunted by my men. Whatever evidence you think you have is meaningless without someone to present it. Nakos will reach Governor Wallace," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "The truth about the Covenant will come out." "The truth," Burke rose from his chair, approaching Sarah with measured steps. "The truth is that I built this county from nothing. I brought order to chaos, prosperity to desolation. Yes, there were costs. There always are when building something of value." "See, costs like my brother's life," Cooper spat. "Like Captain Calloway's." Burke's eyes narrowed as he studied Cooper. "You seem to take their deaths personally, Mr. Cooper." "Henry Calloway was my brother," Cooper stated flatly. "Different mothers, same father. I came to Redemption Creek to find him, to know the brother I never had growing up. Instead, I found his murderer." Burke absorbed this information with a slight tilt of his head. "Interesting. Had I known, I might have handled Henry's situation differently." He turned back to Sarah. "And you, Mrs. Calloway? So much tragedy in your life. Husband killed in the war, brother murdered, and now here you are about to join them." "My husband wasn't killed in the war," Sarah corrected him. "He was murdered by Jake Harmon on your orders, because he discovered what you were doing even then." A flicker of surprise crossed Burke's face. Harmon told you this. Before we killed him, Sarah confirmed, taking grim satisfaction in Burke's reaction. Harmon is dead. Burke's composure finally cracked. You killed my most loyal man. He died as he lived, Cooper said coldly. A coward serving a greater coward. Burke's face flushed with rage. He struck Cooper hard across the face, splitting his lip. You know nothing of loyalty, of sacrifice. I served this country while men like your father squandered their potential on drink and women. Cooper spat blood at Burke's feet. My father may have had his flaws, but he was twice the man you are. Burke laughed bitterly. Your father was a drunkard who couldn't keep his trousers buttoned. He fathered you on some St. Louis whore, then had the gall to marry into my family and father Henry on my sister. Sarah stared at Burke in shock. What are you saying? Burke's face twisted with old hatred. Henry Calloway was my nephew by marriage. I gave him a position at the bank out of family obligation despite his father's worthlessness. And how did he repay me? By betraying the covenant. The revelation stunned both Sarah and Cooper. Henry related to Burke. The connections between them all were more tangled than Sarah could have imagined. Family or not, Sarah said finally, you ordered his death just as you ordered James's. Necessary sacrifices. Burke dismissed. Just as your deaths will be necessary for the covenant to continue its work. He turned to Sheriff Miller. Take them to the cellar. Use whatever means necessary to determine who else knows about us. What evidence remains out there. Then dispose of them quietly this time. As Miller moved to comply, the mansion's front door burst open. A deputy rushed in, his face pale with alarm. Judge Riders approaching from the east. Army uniforms, at least 30 men. Burke froze. The Army, who authorized. Governor Wallace himself is with them. Sir, the deputy continued, they're carrying arrest warrants for you, the sheriff and the mayor. Something about corruption and murder charges. The blood drained from Burke's face. Impossible. They couldn't have reached Santa Fe and returned so quickly. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Narcos had succeeded more thoroughly than they could have imagined. But how had the response come so quickly? The answer came in the form of another arrival, a tall, distinguished man in a U.S. Marshal's uniform, walking with the aid of a cane but very much alive. Marshal Jackson. Cooper breathed in disbelief. The marshal surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on Sarah and Cooper's battered forms before settling on Burke. William Burke, he announced formally, by the authority of the territorial governor, I am placing you under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, money laundering, and the murders of Henry Calloway and at least 7 other citizens of this territory. Burke seemed to age years in seconds, his shoulders sagging, the fight draining out of him. Jackson, we were told you were dead. Nearly was, the marshal replied grimly. Your men left me for dead in that ravine, but it seems God had other plans. As Army soldiers filed into the mansion, Sarah finally understood Marshal Jackson hadn't died after receiving Henry's evidence. He'd been wounded but had survived and had already been building a case against Burke when Sarah and Cooper's evidence reached Santa Fe. Sheriff Miller made a desperate move for his gun, but a soldier's rifle butt to his stomach doubled him over before he could draw. Mayor Thompson simply sat down heavily in a chair, all resistance gone from his corpulent frame. Marshal Jackson approached Sarah and Cooper as soldiers secured Burke and his men. Mrs. Calloway, Mr. Cooper, your Apache friend reached a telegraph station this morning with quite a story. Said you two might need some assistance. Narcos is safe, Sarah asked, relief flooding through her. Jackson nodded. Safe and waiting in Santa Fe with Governor Wallace. Your evidence, combined with what I've been gathering these past weeks, is more than enough to bring down the covenant completely. As soldiers helped Sarah and Cooper to their feet, Sarah found herself looking at Burke, once so powerful, now a defeated old man in handcuffs. There should have been triumph in this moment, satisfaction in seeing Henry and James's killer brought to justice. Instead, she felt only a profound weariness. It's over, Cooper said quietly beside her, seeming to read her thoughts. Yes, Sarah agreed. It's over. But as they were led from the mansion toward waiting wagons that would take them to Santa Fe and proper medical care, Sarah knew it wasn't truly over. Not for her, justice had been served. The Covenant destroyed Burke and his men destined for prison or the gallows. Yet James and Henry remained dead, and no amount of justice could bring them back. The chapter of vengeance had ended. The chapter of healing had yet to begin. 3 months passed before Sarah returned to Redemption Creek. Spring had given way to summer, the hills around the town turning from green to gold under the relentless New Mexico sun. Much had changed in her absence. Judge William Burke and Sheriff Frank Miller had been tried in Santa Fe, their crimes laid bare before a packed courthouse. The evidence Sarah and Cooper had gathered, combined with Marshall Jackson's investigation and testimony from dozens of victims of the Covenant, had been overwhelming. Both men were sentenced to hang, though Burke cheated the gallows by taking his own life the night before his scheduled execution. Mayor Thompson had turned state's evidence, providing details of the Covenant's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. George Carson, the cattle baron, had fled to Mexico, but was reportedly being hunted by Pinkerton detectives. The Covenant was destroyed, its grip on Redemption Creek broken forever. But the town had paid a heavy price. With its power structure dismantled, many businesses had closed. The bank, once the center of the Covenant's money laundering operation, stood empty, its windows boarded up. Sarah gazed at these changes from horseback as she rode slowly down Main Street. She was changed too. Her wounds had healed, leaving new scars to join the old ones. Her auburn hair now had more strands of silver than before. But the most profound changes were invisible. The rage that had driven her across half the territory in pursuit of vengeance had burned itself out, leaving behind a calm clarity she hadn't felt since before James's death. She dismounted outside what had once been Henry's boarding house, now converted into a newspaper office. The sign above the door read, Redemption Creek Herald, and beneath it in smaller letters, M. Cooper, editor and publisher. Cooper had recovered from his wounds more quickly than Sarah, his younger body more resilient. While she convalesced in Santa Fe, he had returned to Redemption Creek with a mission to help rebuild the town on a foundation of truth rather than corruption. The bell above the door jingled as Sarah entered. Cooper looked up from his printing press, ink staining his fingers, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. His face broke into a wide smile at the sight of her. Sarah, you're back. He embraced her warmly, mindful of proprieties by keeping it brief but sincere. You look well, he said, stepping back to assess her. Santa Fe agreed with you. I was ready to leave, Sarah replied. Too much politics. Too many fine ladies asking about my ordeal, as if it were a parlor story. Cooper laughed. Well, you've come to the right place. Redemption Creek is decidedly lacking in fine ladies these days. He gestured to a chair beside his desk. Coffee, it's terrible, but it's hot. Sarah accepted both the chair and the coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. I see your talents don't extend to brewing. Among my many shortcomings, Cooper agreed cheerfully. So are you just passing through, or? I've come home, Sarah said simply. For good, shuckawum. Something flickered in Cooper's eyes, relief perhaps, or happiness. The ranch. Still mine according to the Territorial Land Office. I thought I'd try to make something of it, the way James and I once planned. It'll be hard work starting from scratch, Sarah shrugged. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I won't be entirely alone. She nodded toward the window where Nakos could be seen watering their horses. He's decided to stay on as my foreman. Says he's had enough of trading for a while. A wise choice. Cooper approved. Nakos proved himself a true friend. As did you, Sarah said quietly. I never properly thanked you, Matthew, for everything you did for Henry and for me. Cooper looked away, uncomfortable with gratitude. I did what anyone would have done. No, Sarah shook her head firmly. You did what only a man of true principle would do. Henry would have been proud to know his brother. At the mention of Henry, Cooper's expression softened. I wish I'd known him better. Had more time with him. I have his journals, Sarah offered. All of them, not just the one with evidence against Burke. If you'd like to read them, someday get to know him through his words. I'd like that very much, Cooper said, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping the atrocious coffee. Outside, Redemption Creek went about its business, diminished from its former prosperity, but somehow more authentic without the Covenant's corrupting influence. So, Cooper said finally, a newspaper editor and a rancher. We're quite the pair of rebuilders. This town deserves a second chance, Sarah replied, just as we all do. The bell above the door jingled again, admitting a tall, lean man leaning on a cane. Marshal Jackson, now permanently stationed in Redemption Creek, as part of the territorial governor's efforts to reform the county. Mrs. Calloway. He greeted her with a tip of his hat. Welcome back. Cooper's been counting the days until your return, though he'd never admit it. Cooper flushed, shooting the marshal an irritated look. Was there something you needed, Jackson? Or did you just come to embarrass me? Jackson grinned unrepentant. Both actually got a telegram from the governor. I thought you both should see. He produced a yellow slip of paper from his pocket, handing it to Cooper. Cooper read it quickly, his expression changing from annoyance to surprise. Is this verified? Came through official channels, Jackson confirmed. Thought you might want to run it in tomorrow's edition. Cooper handed the telegram to Sarah. It was brief but momentous. Jake Harmon alive, stop captured near El Paso, trying to cross into Mexico, stop being returned to Santa Fe for trial. Stop. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Impossible, he was shot. I saw him fall. Apparently, Jackson said grimly, it takes more than one bullet to kill Jake Harmon. He was badly wounded, but managed to crawl away during the confusion. Been hiding out ever since working his way south. Succoam, Cooper watched Sarah carefully. Are you all right? Sarah stared at the telegram, emotions warring within her. Harmon alive. The man who had murdered James, who had helped kill Henry, who had nearly killed her, and Cooper alive and coming back to New Mexico. When will he reach Santa Fe? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Jackson replied, they're bringing him by prison wagon. Governor wants him to stand trial for all of it. The murders, the bank robberies, everything. And they have enough evidence without us? Cooper asked. Jackson nodded. More than enough between Thompson's testimony and documents recovered from Burke's safe. Harmon will hang. You won't need to testify if you don't want to. Sarah folded the telegram carefully and handed it back to Cooper. I want to... Cooper studied her face. Are you sure it will mean reliving everything, having your name in papers across the territory? I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. I want to look him in the eye when he's sentenced. I want him to know that despite everything he did, we won. The truth won. Jackson nodded in approval. I'll let the prosecutor know. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a town to patrol. He tipped his hat again and departed, the bell jangling in his wake. Cooper set the telegram on his desk and looked at Sarah with concern. I thought it was over, that you'd found peace. I have, Sarah assured him. This isn't about vengeance anymore. It's about closure, about finishing what we started. Cooper seemed unconvinced, but he nodded. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. We'll face him together. Together, Sarah agreed, finding comfort in the word. After so many years of solitude, of keeping people at arm's length, she had found unlikely allies, a brother-in-law she never knew she had, an Apache trader who had risked his life for justice, a marshal who had nearly died pursuing the truth. Not just allies, she realized, friends, perhaps even a new kind of family. As she left the newspaper office to begin the ride to her ranch, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Harmon's survival was a shock, but not a devastating one. The man who had once embodied her nightmares now seemed diminished, a criminal awaiting justice. Nothing more. Nakos fell in beside her as they rode out of town. Bad news, he asked, having observed her expression as she exited the Herald office. Old news, Sarah corrected, a ghost from the past that needs putting to rest. Nakos nodded in understanding. Some ghosts, stubborn, need proper burial. Yes, Sarah agreed. And this one will get it through the law this time. Otter. They rode in silence for a while, the familiar landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains spreading before them. When they crested the final rise before her ranch, Sarah reined in her horse, taking in the sight. The small house stood much as she had left it, though somewhat weathered by 3 months of neglect. The barn needed repairs, the corral a new gate. The fields that James had once dreamed of planting with wheat lay fallow, overrun with native grasses. Home, Sarah said softly. Nako surveyed the ranch with a critical eye. Much work, he observed. Many days, many hands needed. We'll manage, Sarah replied, one day at a time. As they approached the house, Sarah was surprised to see smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was there. She dismounted cautiously, her hand moving to the revolver she still carried out of habit. Nako similarly prepared himself, drawing a knife from his belt. The door opened before they reached it, and a young woman stepped out, Apache, perhaps 18, with a quiet dignity that reminded Sarah of Nakos himself. Father, the girl greeted Nakos. You return with the widow woman. Sarah looked at Nakos in surprise. Your daughter, Nakos nodded, a rare smile softening his weathered face. Nijoni means beautiful in my language. She come to help. Help, Sarah echoed. With ranch. Nijoni explained in careful English. Father say you need many hands. I cook clean. Learn ranch work. Sarah was touched by the gesture, but concerned. I can't pay much, not until the ranch is producing again. Nako shook his head. No pay needed. We build something together. New beginning. New beginning, the words resonated within Sarah. Wasn't that what she had been seeking all along? Not just vengeance for the past, but a path forward into the future. Thank you, she said simply, both of you. Aku. They entered the house together, and Sarah was surprised to find it clean, a fire burning cheerfully in the hearth, the smell of something savory bubbling in a pot over the flames. Been here 2 days. Nijoni explained, make ready for you. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, not of grief this time, but gratitude. After so much death, so much hatred and violence, this simple act of kindness struck her more powerfully than she could have imagined. That night, the three of them sat around Sarah's table, sharing the stew Nijoni had prepared and planning the work ahead. The ranch would need new stock cattle perhaps, or sheep. The fields would need plowing come autumn. The house and outbuildings required repairs before winter. It seemed overwhelming, but as they talked, Sarah realized they were creating something she had lacked for too long. A vision of the future, a reason to look forward rather than back. As Nakos and Nijoni retired to the barn where they had made comfortable quarters for themselves, Sarah found herself alone in the house for the first time in months. She opened the chest containing James's belongings, his letters, his uniform, his Bible with pressed flowers from their courtship. For years, these relics had been sacred to her, untouchable symbols of her grief. Now she handled them with a new perspective. They were no longer relics of a life cut short, but treasured mementos of a love that had shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for the trials she would face. I miss you, she whispered to James's memory. I always will, but I think it's time I started living again. She closed the chest gently, not locking it as she once would have. The past was not to be locked away, but integrated into the present, informing the future without dictating it. Sarah slept that night without nightmares for the first time since Henry's death. The trial of Jake Harmon became a sensation throughout the New Mexico territory. Newspapers from as far away as Denver and San Francisco sent reporters to cover the proceedings. The story had everything to capture the public imagination: corruption, murder, brave citizens fighting against overwhelming odds. Sarah Cooper and Nakos traveled to Santa Fe together when the time came to testify. The city was vastly different from the desperate scene of their escape months earlier. Now they entered, openly staying at a respectable hotel, treated with deference by officials who had read accounts of their courage. The courthouse was packed on the day Sarah was called to testify. She wore a simple black dress, her hair arranged modestly beneath a small hat. As she took the witness stand, her eyes found Harmon at the defense table. He had changed. The once powerful enforcer was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, the scar on his face standing out starkly against his pallid skin. When he met Sarah's gaze, she saw something she had not expected: fear. The prosecutor led her through her testimony methodically. Sarah recounted Henry's murder, her discovery of the Covenant's operations, the pursuit and the final confrontation at Burke's mansion. When asked about James, she spoke with a calm dignity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. Captain James Calloway did not die in battle, as I was led to believe, for 8 years, she stated. He was murdered by the defendant on Judge Burke's orders for discovering their criminal activities during the war. Harmon's attorney, a sharp-featured man from St. Louis, objected, "Hearsay, Your Honor. Mrs. Calloway has no direct knowledge of her husband's death." "I have the defendant's own admission," Sarah countered. "He boasted of killing James when he had me at his mercy at Burke's mansion." The judge overruled the objection, and Sarah continued her testimony. Throughout, she remained composed even when describing the most harrowing aspects of her ordeal. She was no longer the vengeful widow hunting outlaws, but a citizen seeking justice through proper channels. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his approach was predictably aggressive. "Mrs. Calloway, you admit to killing several men during your crusade. Is that correct?" "I acted in self-defense," Sarah replied evenly, "against men who had murdered my brother and were trying to kill me." "And did you not pursue these men with the express purpose of killing them, tracking them like animals?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I pursued them to bring them to justice. When that justice wasn't available through corrupt officials, I took matters into my own hands. It wasn't my first choice." The attorney pressed on, trying to paint Sarah as a vigilante, a woman who had abandoned propriety to engage in a bloodthirsty quest for revenge. But Sarah remained unshaken. Her responses measured her demeanor, dignified. "Final question. Mrs. Calloway," the attorney said after a frustrating hour, "do you hate the defendant?" Sarah considered the question carefully, looking at Harmon, the man who had destroyed so much, caused so much pain, the man she had once hunted with single-minded determination. "No," she said finally, "I don't hate him, I pity him." Harmon's face twitched as if her pity was more wounding than her hatred would have been. Cooper's testimony followed Sarah's, corroborating her account and adding details about his own investigation into the covenant. As Henry's brother, his emotional testimony about discovering his sibling's murder made a powerful impression on the jury. Nakos testified last, his dignified presence and straightforward account of helping Sarah and Cooper escape Burke's men, adding a final compelling element to the prosecution's case. The trial lasted a week, but the jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. As the judge pronounced sentence, death by hanging, Sarah watched Harmon's face. There was no defiance there, no sneer of contempt, only resignation and perhaps a flicker of relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Cooper, now used to dealing with the press as a newspaper editor, himself handled most of the questions. Sarah stood slightly apart, watching the crowd, feeling strangely detached from the spectacle. A woman approached her, well-dressed, middle-aged, with a kind face lined by sorrow. "Mrs. Calloway, my name is Elizabeth Hartwell. My husband was one of the Covenant's victims 5 years ago. I wanted to thank you for what you did. For all of us who couldn't fight back." Sarah was taken aback. This was the first time she had been personally thanked by one of the Covenant's many victims. "I didn't do it alone," she said modestly. "No." Mrs. Hartwell agreed, glancing at Cooper and Nakos. "But you started it. You gave us all hope that justice was possible, even against men like Burke." As the woman moved away, Sarah realized that her personal quest for vengeance had become something larger, something that had given voice to dozens of victims who had suffered silently under the Covenant's reign. That night, as Sarah, Cooper, and Nakos dined together at their hotel, a messenger arrived with a note addressed to all 3 of them. It was an invitation to meet with Governor Wallace the following morning. "What do you think he wants?" Sarah wondered. Cooper shrugged. "Probably to thank us officially, maybe offer a reward." Nakos looked skeptical. "White man's government rarely gives a patchy reward." "Times are changing," Cooper pointed out, "and you're a hero of this story. Nakos, whether the government recognizes it or not." The governor received them in his private office, a spacious room with windows overlooking the Santa Fe Plaza. Levi Wallace was younger than Sarah had expected, with intelligent eyes and a forthright manner. "Mrs. Calloway, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Nakos." He greeted them each with a firm handshake. "Please be seated. I've been looking forward to meeting the 3 people who brought down the Covenant." The governor listened as they recounted their experiences, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing them to tell their story in their own words. When they finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "What you've done is extraordinary," he said, "not just bringing criminals to justice, but exposing a corruption that had infected an entire county. The territory owes you a debt that can't easily be repaid." "We didn't do it for reward," Sarah said. "I understand that," Wallace assured her, "but recognition is still appropriate. The territorial legislature has authorized a substantial monetary compensation for each of you, restitution, if you will, for your sacrifices and losses." He handed each of them an envelope. Sarah opened hers to find a certificate representing a sum that made her breath catch. It was enough to rebuild her ranch 10 times over to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Cooper looked equally stunned by his certificate. Nakos examined his with a neutral expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Additionally, Wallace continued, "The properties seized from the Covenant members are being sold at auction. As the primary victims, you have first right to purchase any of these assets at a nominal price. Should you wish," Sarah thought of Burke's mansion, the Bank Carson's vast ranch holdings. The Covenant had accumulated enormous wealth through their criminal enterprises. "I don't want any of it," she said firmly, "except—" An idea formed, something that had been taking shape in her mind since returning to Redemption Creek. "The bank building, I'd like to purchase that." Wallace looked surprised. "The bank you intend to go into finance?" "Mrs. Calloway." "Not exactly," Sarah explained. "I have another purpose in mind." Cooper was watching her with growing understanding. "The school?" he said. "You're thinking of Henry's idea." Sarah nodded. In his journals, Henry had written often about the need for a proper school in Redemption Creek, one that would educate all children regardless of background or means. Henry believed education was the best defense against corruption and injustice. Sarah told the governor, "I'd like to use the bank building to establish a school in his name, the Henry Calloway Academy." Wallace smiled approvingly. "A fitting memorial, consider it done. The building is yours for $1. Cooper leaned forward. "If Sarah's taking the bank, I'd like Carson's printing press and type shop. The Herald needs better equipment if we're going to reach the entire county." Timothy. Wallace agreed readily. He turned to Nakos. "And you, sir, is there any Covenant property you wish to claim?" Nakos considered the question longer than the others had. Finally he spoke. "Land south of town, where creek meets river. Once Apache land before white men came. Burke took it for cattle." Wallace consulted a map on his desk. "Carson's south pasture. It's yours. I'll have the deed drawn up immediately." As they left the governor's office, Cooper couldn't contain his curiosity. "Nakos, I didn't know you had an interest in ranching, beyond working for Sarah." Nakos shook his head. "Not for ranch, for people. My cousin's band needs place to settle. Too many soldiers near reservation now. This land, good place with water game." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for Nakos. While she and Cooper had thought of rebuilding their own lives, he had been thinking of his entire community. "You're a good man, Nakos," she said simply. The Apache trader shrugged. "Man must think of family first, then self." The day of Harmon's execution dawned clear and cool. Sarah had debated whether to attend, ultimately deciding she needed to witness this final chapter of her long journey. Cooper accompanied her to the gallows erected behind the territorial prison. A small crowd had gathered, officials, reporters, a few curious citizens. There was none of the carnival atmosphere that often surrounded public executions, only a somber recognition of justice being served. Harmon emerged from the prison flanked by guards, his steps steady, despite the shackles on his ankles. A priest walked beside him, murmuring prayers that Harmon seemed to ignore. As he mounted the gallows steps, his eyes searched the crowd, finally fixing on Sarah. She met his gaze calmly, without hatred or triumph. The warden read the death warrant, reciting Harmon's crimes in a monotonous voice. When asked if he had any last words, Harmon surprised everyone by speaking directly to Sarah. "Mrs. Calloway," he called, his voice stronger than his wasted appearance, "suggested I die today by the law, a cleaner death than I gave your husband or your brother. I don't ask forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it, but I tell you this, you won. Where Burke failed, where I failed, you succeeded. Remember that." It was as close to an apology as a man like Harmon could manage. Sarah acknowledged his words with a slight nod, a gesture not of forgiveness, but of acceptance. The black hood was placed over Harmon's head, the noose adjusted around his neck. Sarah did not look away as the trapdoor opened. She owed it to James, to Henry, to herself, to witness this final act of justice. When it was over, she and Cooper walked away from the prison in silence. It was done. All of it, the pursuit, the fight, the trial, the punishment. The cycle that had begun with Henry's murder was complete. "How do you feel?" Cooper asked finally as they reached their hotel. Sarah considered the question. "At peace," she said, and realized it was true. Not happy, not triumphant, just at peace. Cooper nodded in understanding. "And now we go home." Sarah said, "We build something new." The Henry Calloway Academy opened its doors 6 months later in what had once been Redemption Creek's bank. Sarah had used part of her compensation from the governor to renovate the building, replacing the imposing teller counters with rows of desks, the manager's office with a library filled with books. On opening day, 27 children enrolled, a mix of white Mexican and Apache students, boys and girls alike. Many parents had been skeptical at first, particularly about the integration of races. But Sarah's standing in the community after the Covenant affair gave her words weight. "Education is the great equalizer," she had told the town meeting. "The light that dispels the darkness of ignorance and prejudice." That's what Henry believed, and that's what this school will stand for. She had hired 2 certified teachers from back east, but took an active role in the academy herself, teaching a class on frontier history that quickly became the students' favorite. Her experiences during the war and in bringing down the Covenant gave her lessons and authenticity no textbook could match. Cooper's Herald, meanwhile, had expanded its circulation to cover the entire county with a new printing press capable of producing 1,000 copies per day. His editorials championed progressive causes: women's suffrage, fair treatment for Native Americans, honest government. Some old-timers grumbled, but most citizens appreciated having a newspaper that served as a watchdog rather than a mouthpiece for corruption. Nakos's cousin's band had settled on the land south of town, establishing a small but thriving community that traded regularly with Redemption Creek. Initial tensions had given way to cautious cooperation, particularly after Nakos arranged for several of the band's children to attend the academy. Sarah's ranch, too, was transformed. With Nakos as foreman and a crew of workers from town, she had established a modest cattle operation that was beginning to show a profit. The house had been expanded, the fallow fields planted with wheat and corn. Life settled into a rhythm: weekdays at the academy, weekends at the ranch. Sarah found fulfillment in both worlds, in educating the next generation and in working the land James had loved. Cooper came to dinner at the ranch every Sunday, a tradition that had begun casually but had become an anchor in their week. Sometimes they discussed business, the academy's needs stories for the Herald, developments in the county, but more often they simply enjoyed each other's company, along with Nakos and Najoni. It was during one such dinner, nearly a year after Harmon's execution, that Cooper surprised Sarah with a question. "I've been thinking," he said as they sat on the porch after the meal, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "The Herald is doing well, the academy is thriving, but there's something missing." "What's that?" Sarah asked, content and relaxed after a good meal and better company. Cooper hesitated, suddenly nervous. "A partnership between us? A more permanent one?" Sarah's breath caught as she understood his meaning. "Matthew, hear me out," he said quickly. "I'm not speaking of romance, though I won't deny I've grown to care for you deeply. What I'm proposing is a practical alliance between 2 people who work well together, who share the same values, the same vision for this community. We could do more together than apart." Sarah studied his face in the fading light. Cooper was a good man, honorable and kind. In the past year, he had become her closest friend, her most trusted confidant. What he was offering wasn't passion, but companionship, partnership, a shared purpose. Once she might have considered such a proposal an insult to James's memory, but now, with the perspective of time and all she had experienced, she saw it differently. James would want her to be happy to build a life filled with purpose and connection. "I'd need time to consider," she said finally. "This isn't a decision to make lightly." Cooper nodded, relief visible on his face that she hadn't outright rejected his proposal. Of course, take all the time you need. As Cooper rode back to town that evening, Sarah remained on the porch, lost in thought. From the corral, Nakos appeared, settling onto the step beside her, with his customary quiet grace. Cooper asked question, he inquired, having observed their conversation from a distance. Yes, Sarah admitted. A big one. Nakos nodded sagely. Good man, different from your James, but good heart. How did you know about James? Sarah asked, surprised. See how you touch his letters, how you speak his name. Love not end with death. No, Sarah agreed softly. It doesn't, but life continue. Nakos added, new journey possible, even with old love in heart. Sarah pondered his words. Is that how it was for you after Najoni's mother died? Nakos nodded. Many years alone. Then one day realized Teka would want me to find peace, to be father to our daughter, not betray her memory, to honor her wish for my happiness. It was the most Nakos had ever shared about his personal history. Sarah was touched by his willingness to open up, to offer his experience as guidance. Thank you, she said sincerely, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you this past year. Nakos smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. We help each other build something good from something bad. This is way of life. As he left her to her thoughts, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a grief-stricken widow seeking vengeance to a woman with purpose. Community, the beginnings of happiness. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she married James all those years ago, but it was a good life nonetheless. The following Sunday, Cooper returned for dinner as usual, careful not to press Sarah for an answer to his proposal. As they walked the property afterward, inspecting the new calves in the north pasture, Sarah made her decision. I've been thinking about your question, she said as they leaned against the fence watching the calves frolic in the late afternoon sun. Cooper tensed slightly beside her. And I think yes, not right away, we should give it time, get to know each other in this new light. But yes, eventually I would be honored to join my life with yours. The joy that spread across Cooper's face was answer enough, but he took her hand gently in his, raising it to his lips in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of your trust. Sarah. I know you will, she replied and meant it. That evening, after Cooper had returned to town, Sarah visited the small plot of land behind the house, where she had planted a garden in James's memory. Wildflowers bloomed among vegetables and herbs, a beautiful chaos he would have appreciated. I've found my way forward, she told his memory. Not forgetting you, never that, but building something new from the foundation you gave me. I think you'd approve. I hope you would. A breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the hills. In that moment, Sarah felt a sense of wholeness, of coming full circle. The widow who had hunted outlaws with no mercy had found something more powerful than vengeance, more healing than retribution. She had found justice, she had found community, she had found home. And in that finding, Sarah Calloway had finally found peace.